The topic for panel discussion is how I select IV fluid. How I select my IV fluid.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So you can see that, is my mic working? Am I heard? So you have stalwarts, people who've written textbooks, who've been my teachers, my mentors, right? So probably I'm not very qualified to conduct or moderate this panel. So what I actually thought was to put different scenarios at which these speakers are probably the best. And I'm actually going in the order by which their names were given to me. So, where is my slide? How do I move it? ഇവിടെ ഒന്നും കാണുന്നില്ലല്ലോ. So sorry, there's a lot of problem here. Somebody can move the slides or give me a mouse. I'm not able to get there. Okay, I got it. All right, here we go. And it's blank. All right. So my first person to whom I'm addressing a case scenario is none other than Dr. Rebecca, whose textbook I think has been read by consultants and postgraduates alike. And the case scenario I'm putting across to you, madam, is a child with congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. So just to introduce the case, a 1-month-old child weighing 3 kgs, male child, is brought to the hospital by his parents with a history of projectile vomiting after feeds for the last 3 to 4 days. The child is afebrile, looks a bit lethargic, skin turgor is reduced, fontanelle appears sunken. An examination reveals a heart rate of 135. According to the history, the urine output is adequate. An ultrasound examination after preliminary investigation confirms the diagnosis of hypertrophic pyloric stenosis, and the child is scheduled for surgery. So, madam, you are the expert in this scenario. If this child were to come to us for a pre-anesthesia evaluation for a surgery, what are the problems that you would expect in the child, and what are the implications of these problems?
Basically, I wouldn't take up for surgery straight away because this is a medical emergency, not a surgical emergency. First, we need to assess the quantum of dehydration. You said that the child looks lethargic, fontanelles are depressed, heart rate is slightly raised for a child that age, and they say that the urine output is adequate. Unless it's measured, we can't tell for sure that it's adequate. We're just going by whether the diapers are wet or not. So we need to look at what the metabolic derangements could be. Now, if the fontanelles are depressed and the urine output is actually less than 0.5 ml per hour, this one would go into a severe dehydration. But it doesn't look like that. It looks like a moderate dehydration. If there is severe dehydration, you know for sure the metabolic derangements would include hypochloremia because the child is vomiting and the gastric acid is being lost. Now, even if the gastric acid is being lost, when gastric acid is produced, the pancreas tends to produce alkali, bicarb. So the metabolic alkalosis occurs. Now, along with this, when there's alkalosis, it's presented to the kidney. The kidney can't handle the bicarb. So it tends to excrete a lot of the bicarb. Along with that, sodium is lost. At the same time, potassium is low. Why? Because part of the potassium is lost in the vomitus. And we also know when there's metabolic alkalosis, potassium shifts into the cells. And we know that aldosterone is secreted trying to keep sodium in, and there is a shift. So we need to remember that there's 1, dehydration, 2, metabolic alkalosis, 3, hypokalemia, and for hypochloremia. So we need to replace the dehydration, the water, because if there's dehydration under anesthesia, we tend to get hypotension. The child tends to get cold, and there are a lot of other problems like acidosis. Metabolic alkalosis, the biggest problem I think is post-op apnea because of the alkalosis. Hypokalemia, we know, causes a lot of arrhythmias, and we may have cardiac arrest. So we need to treat all this before we start. The question of what fluid would you want to use for rehydration? If the child falls into the severe category, the first thing we do is to give sodium chloride. 20 ml per kilogram is given first. If, on the other hand, the child goes into the moderate category, which this child seems to be, we would give 5% dextrose with half normal saline. We do not add potassium until the child starts producing urine. Once the child starts producing urine, we add potassium to this fluid. Now, what is the end point we hope to get? Let's look at each of the deficits. Chloride, I would like to get 106, at least 106 millimoles per liter. Bicarb, I'd like less than 26 millimoles per liter, and sodium, 135. Remember, children tend to show hyponatremic problems, convulsions, like a previous speaker said, at a much higher sodium. So we want a sodium of 135. So once we get that, and we know that the urine chloride is all right, and urine output is at least 1 ml per hour, per kilogram per hour, then we can take up this child for surgery.
Right. So, thank you, madam. I think this is a PGs should take note. It's not the standard ringer lactate. It's one of those rare situations when normal saline or half normal saline is given to the child. So you accept this child, ma'am, with a chloride of 106 and a bicarb of 26 that you wanted. Heart rate has now come down to 128, and we believe the hydration is adequate. You schedule the child at 8 a.m. and the mother has been breastfeeding. The child vomits his feed at 4 a.m. and after that the mother is not given anything. The child is brought to the theatre at 8 o'clock. Meanwhile, the pediatrician has secured an IV line and the child is getting half DNS at 4 ml per kg per hour. So you get the child and you're going to give anesthesia. Leaving the anesthesia part, what exactly would you start as an IV fluid? What is your rationale for the choice of IV fluid? And then I'm just moving to this next question also because we are running short of time. Midway through the surgery, somebody measures the blood sugar and gets a value of 68. What would you do?
For the IV fluids, I would separate my thoughts into maintenance fluid and replacement fluid. Replacement fluid should be balanced salt solution. In this case, I would even think of normal saline. But in a pyloric stenosis, there's very little blood loss, so there isn't much as replacement fluid. So I perhaps would continue the half normal saline throughout the surgery at 6 to 8 ml per kilogram until I've got the child stabilized, and then I'll continue at 4 ml per kilogram. Now, if the procedure shows 68 milligram per deciliter, this is not very low blood sugar in a child who's only a month, a month old. So I wouldn't worry too much. I would continue because I'm giving 5% dextrose with normal saline. Now,
what is your rationale to use a 5%, ma'am, in this case?
This was because it was going on already. In fact, I was going to say for any child who's 1 month old, not particularly this child, I wouldn't use 5% dextrose, this hypotonic fluid, for long. I would use it just for correction. Under normal circumstance, I would rather use 1% dextrose with a balanced salt solution. I personally use full strength ringer lactate with dextrose, which I make 1%.
So, ma'am, giving a Ringer's lactate which contains the lactate, would it worsen an ongoing alkalosis? Because it's going to take some time for that alkalosis to get corrected after a pyloromyotomy.
No, as I mentioned before, in this particular case, I would use normal saline as my balanced salt solution.
Right.
As I said, in other cases, I use Ringalactate.
Thank you, ma'am. Because of paucity of time, I hope the audience has got this message. Management of a 1-month-old child with pyloric stenosis, assessing dehydration, resuscitation perhaps with normal saline, half normal saline. Dextrose ideally should be 1%, and the carrier fluid for that could be half or full normal saline. I'm now going on to my next speaker. He's a very, very eminent speaker. You heard his wonderful lecture. And this is truly my area. Hepatectomy for cholangiocarcinoma, which I'm going to present to him. Dr. Pankaj Kundra. A 64-year-old male who's been diagnosed with a cholangiocarcinoma of the left lobe of the liver is scheduled for a left hepatectomy. His preoperative investigations show a normal CBC, hemoglobin 10, platelets 3.65 lakhs, renal functions are normal, 34 and 0.89, sodium is slightly low, 132, potassium slightly high, 4.5, INR is normal. It's a cholangiocarcinoma, bilirubin is marginally elevated, 4.5 with a direct component of 3.5, enzymes normal to mildly being elevated, alkaline phosphatase raised to 365. So if this patient were scheduled for an elective open left hepatectomy, what is your fluid of choice? What is the fluid strategy and why?
Yeah, it's a little different scenario because most of the hepatectomies we talk about the donor ones and the other type of hepatectomies. This is associated with an associated malignancy of the gallbladder. So which part of the lobe of the liver is involved?
It's an entire left lobe.
Left lobe.
Left system is obstructed with a cholangiocarcinoma.
Fine. So if you talk about the fluid strategy which we'll have during hepatectomy, now what we need to remember, it's a very highly vascular structure. And most of the sinusites, the pressures would be high, and we need to control the bleeding. The only way to make sure that the bleeding is controlled during the hepatectomy procedure is to keep the sinusoidal pressures on a lower side, and that would warrant that you restrict your fluids, do not load the patients too much with fluids.
Right.
Does the patient have ascites or other
In a cholangio, the liver functions are normal. It's the
Normal,
biliary
right?
system which is obstructed.
so there's
there is,
no- so
he is
there's-
otherwise normal, excepting for looking yellow.
What about serum albumin?
Serum albumin for him is 3.8.
3.8. So essentially, if these figures are normal and if the patient is not dehydrated and the patient has been able to take orally well, is accepting oral feeds and it has not been actively vomiting.
This is not
well-
a cirrhosis, it's
well-
just an
well preserved.
obstruction with a normal liver.
Yeah, because with obstruction, they can still have vomiting, they can have intolerance, they may not be on
Right,
proper feed diet, they lose their appetite. So we need to consider what is the degree of malnutrition. So some sort of evidence should be there about that. But the main strategy would be a conservative strategy.
Right.
You give less amount of
Right.
fluids. And the type of fluid which you will like to give in specifically these conditions, you would avoid normal saline. Unlike what Dr. Rebecca was talking about, the hypertrophic congenital acidosis, because the issue is here with hypochloremic acidosis which can develop in
Yes.
these patients,
Yes.
which can be much harmful. So I would start with something which is pH-based fluid therapy.
Right.
And if you talk about pH-based fluid therapy, the possible IV fluid which you get is an acetate type. I mean, that's the one which I would normally prefer. The issues with Ringal lactate is, if the liver is diseased, like in cirrhosis, it can produce more of lactic acidosis. So preferably Ringal lactate or an acetate-based solution should be the fluid of choice.
Right. So let's say he has come, his liver functions are normal, and you got his baseline blood gas, which shows a lactate of only 1.1. You start with Ringal lactase at that point, right? It's an open surgery, you put an epidural, heart rate is 68, BP is 110, and the CVP is showing 8. So during the time of epidural and induction, you've used 500 ml of Ringer's lactate. As the resection proceeds, what is your target? How would you titrate fluid?
Now, fluid can be actually treated objectively.
Right.
One is, yes, you continuously watch for urine output.
Right.
You should always have a urine output which is more than 0.5 ml per
Right.
kg per hour.
Right.
That's the main thing, that the cardiac output is preserved.
Yes.
The second thing you need to watch out is the temperature.
Is that?
Temperature.
Okay.
So we would put in a temperature probe, continuously monitor temperature, make sure there is no hypothermia. The third thing which you need to watch out is the blood sugar.
Right.
So blood sugar and temperature must be actively monitored in such patients, because there can be issues and they are independent predictors of outcome of the abdominal surgeries whichever we perform. As far as fluid strategy is concerned, you will look at some objective parameters. CVP, if you look at CVP, is not a bad idea. It should not be junked that it is a static monitor, it should not be taken. A trend of CVP can give you a much better idea of what is happening, because we still believe it reflects the sinusoidal pressures directly. And keeping a CVP of around 0 to 5 is what has been recommended, that you keep it on a lower side. Don't allow it to go up, because if you allow it to go up, then there is always a chance of increased bleeding when they do the hepatic resection.
I think that point was put across. Are there postgraduates here? Can you just raise your hands? Postgraduates? None. Couple of them only. So this is a key message. Keep a CVP low, but at the same time, don't compromise hepatic perfusion. As he has said, measure urine output. For a very long time, I just used to move the transducer up because the surgeon kept looking, is it below 5? Is it below 5? So all I did was to raise, and he was very happy. If it was below 5, it really didn't bleed. Never mind where the transducer was. So I would believe that it's more a surgeon's comfort than actual thing. But yes, you don't want a very venous congested liver, because that could bleed. Right. So you have said that you would like to use perhaps the heart rate, maybe the trend of CVP and the urine output. Supposing you had all the monitors and all the time, would you like something that will help you monitor fluid status more accurately?
Yes, the correlations which have now been established with minimum invasive monitoring, because all of these will anyway have an arterial line. So when you have an arterial line in situ, it's good to have, or good to learn about the stroke volume variation, which gives you a very good prediction of the fluid status of the patient. And keeping a stroke volume or a variation of about 10 to 20% would be ideal in these cases.
Right. So you do have the minimally invasive cardiac output monitors, which would tell you by the stroke volume or pulse pressure variation if the patient is normo or hypovolemic. However, in this case, it may be difficult for you to track it down because you're trying to restrict fluids. So this is one of those cases where I might start a NORAD early just to maintain the mean arterial pressure. Dr. Pankaj, question to you again. The resection is underway and you send for an ABG. pH is 7.28, PCO2 normal, PO2 normal. Base excess is actually -8 and the bicarb is 16. Lactates are 4.9, potassium is 4.5. Does this change your management of fluids?
Yeah, I will then go over to the acetate-based fluid management, because if the lactate is coming up, I do not have a choice. It can be because of hyperperfusion, so capillary filling time, looking at the plethysmographic waveforms. Normally what I would do is to see what is the amplification of your SpO2 waveform. Whether it is amplified from 2 to 6 or 8. And if it is at the same amplification and there's not much of variability, then probably the patient is still euvolumic. And then I would pay more attention not to give too much of lactate to the patient, shift over only to acetate.
Right.
But if it is hypovolemia, which is compromising the peripheral circulation, you have to have the look at the previous hour output. How much was prior to that? What is the amount of blood loss which has occurred? Whether we need to start with blood product administration right now. So look at the fluid status and also look at the type of fluid which you are giving. Just one thing to add. I think it's a wise choice, if you can afford, to start with 5% albumin in some of these patients at a rate of about 2 to 3 ml per minute. It makes a lot of sense if the patients can afford. It gives
Right.
you a good colloid on oncotic pressures, and it will retain the fluids for a longer period of time in the intravascular
Right.
space.
I think we've read that article by you on endothelial glycocalyx. So the key message I wanted to convey here is when the lactates start to rise, you try to avoid a lactate-containing fluid, move to an acetate-containing fluid which has non-hepatic sources of metabolism. Also, Ringer's lactate is supposed to increase the blood sugar in diabetics particularly and may consume more oxygen on an already oxygen compromised state. And as Dr. Pankaj has concluded, albumin perhaps, if at all you have to use a colloid, you would choose albumin. Some prefer to give it as 5% albumin if it's available. We don't have it. Most of us have 20 or 25. So we just run it as an infusion of 5 ml per hour when we think it's indicated. Thank you, Dr. Pankaj. Moving on to my next panelist, Dr. Vandana from Lissy Hospital. Preeclampsia for a cesarean section. Dr. Vandana has made her slides, so I'm just going to read the scenario to you. A 34-year-old primigravida, 38-week gestation, diagnosed preeclamptic from 24 weeks, is on labetalol 100 milligrams twice a day. She comes with some abdominal pain and probably early labor with stable vitals and a blood pressure of 138/90. She is, after some time, posted for a cesarean section because of non-progression of labor. Now, since our panel is only on fluids, as Usha has said, how would you manage fluids for this patient? And is it really different from the other patients we are talking about?
Okay. So this is a patient with, I would say, mild preeclampsia. All the investigations are normal. Not too, I mean, she's
Yes,
almost
close to
stable
normal.
on labetalol. Now, she comes for a cesarean section and under spinal anesthesia. So there are two things I would consider. One is that she's a patient of preeclampsia and how I would manage fluids for that. And the second thing is that we have to give her a spinal anesthesia. So the fluid management for spinal anesthesia. Now, preeclampsia, as we know, all these patients are prone to pulmonary edema because of the low oncotic pressure, the increased hydrostatic pressure, there is capillary leak, and also most of them have diastolic dysfunction. Some of them may have systolic dysfunction also. All this makes the patient very prone to pulmonary edema. And they are sort of on the brink, and any extra fluid added may sort of topple them over and make it a difficult situation. So generally what is recommended is 80 ml per hour of a crystalloid solution for maintenance Now, considering that she's coming for a cesarean section under spinal anesthesia. Now, as we all know, these days the trend is towards co-loading and not preloading, because preloading, they say, generally doesn't offer many advantages. It might in fact precipitate pulmonary edema in such patients. And patients of preeclampsia, they say, have lower requirement of vasopressors. They also have less hypotension compared to normal patients. So we may not require a very high volume of crystalloids. So what is recommended is crystalloids, a small,
So you would
maybe
give
about 500
Ringalactate?
ml. Pardon?
Ringalactate would be your fluid of choice?
Ringalactate would be all right in this patient. And along with that, we maintain the blood pressure with phenylephrine. The phenylephrine is preferred to ephedrine with IV boluses of 25 to 50 mics in case of phenylephrine. Now, okay, so this is our patient. Yeah.
Basically, is it actually different from the fluid administration of normal pregnancy? I think you've partly covered that, if you wish to re-emphasize.
So normal pregnancy, like we are, there are some new recent guidelines which were published in 2018. And they say that if you're preloading, you can give colloids. Crystalloids are of no use for preloading. So colloids you can, because they remain longer in the circulation, they can be preloaded. 500 ml can be given, or you can give a crystalloid co-load of 15 to 20 ml.
So you're saying in normal pregnancy, you can give a starch or a gelatin of 500 ml to patients as part of preloading before a subarachnoid block?
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
And you maintain the BP at about 90%, more than 90% of baseline.
So there we are. So supposing you had the same scenario, which is come slightly differently. She's no longer preeclamptic, but she's heading towards features of eclampsia. She has decreased urine output. She claims to have a headache. She looks swollen. Her BP is 180/100, and urine examination shows proteinuria. So she is still scheduled for cesarean section because you have to terminate the pregnancy to treat the eclampsia. So again, your anesthetic at this juncture perhaps would be a general anesthetic. What would your choice of fluid be?
Fluid in this case, I would still go for a crystalloid. I would probably look at an acetate-based solution. Colloids, like it's a little controversial. In this case, I would not
No,
use a colloid.
why are you saying that you wouldn't want to use a lactate-based solution in this? Is
In
it because
this,
of
likely liver
potential hepatic
dysfunction.
involvement?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
right.
probably there's some liver involvement. And the oliguria again can be due to various reasons. It might be just that the patient is not hydrated well. So probably giving a fluid challenge would evaluate whether it's pre-renal or post-renal. And about colloids, I would not probably give colloids in
Right.
this particular
Most
case.
of us would, in this context, stay away from the synthetic colloids at
Yeah,
least.
yeah, yeah. But they say like it's not very clear. The guidelines are not very clear. Recently there was an article which said that the fluid strategies are really not clear. There are not many trials which have examined what fluid should be given to preeclampsia patients. And the role of colloids is also not very clear. It's not known whether it is harmful. This meta-analysis actually examined 6 RCTs, but they did not come to any conclusion about the type of fluid.
So perhaps poorly researched, less well-known area, definitely controversial use of colloids because you don't know which preeclamptic is going to become an eclamptic. So you obviously want to stay away from colloid, and if you had the privilege, perhaps away from lactate-based solution. Conservative fluid strategy is the role, and you should be vigilant for occurrence of pulmonary edema, which you need to treat early.
And probably you can guide the fluid with transthoracic echo or with ultrasound. Lung ultrasound may be a good indicator.
If you had
to-
facilities and the expertise,
Yeah.
having additional monitors would actually help you balance the fluid most appropriately. Thank you,
CVP
Dr.
may
Mani.
not be an,
Is there anything
very
else?
accurate. No, CVP may not be very accurate in
Right,
this case.
right. Okay, so we finished the obstetric case and we now move on to Dr. Vinodan. He's the head of Medical Trust Hospital, again a very senior practicing anesthetist. And the case I have for him is a pyonephrosis in a diabetic coming for nephrectomy. So a 64-year-old gentleman who's a known diabetic for the last 20 years, currently on insulin, Mixtar 26-20-20, admitted with flank pain and hematuria. He's a hypertensive and on 3 medications, Minipress XL, Nebivolol, and Nicardia. His investigations show hemoglobin of 9.5, a random sugar of 256 with a HbA1c of 9.8, urea is elevated at 65, creatinine is suggestive of a class 3 CKD 2.3, sodium 136, potassium elevated at 4.8. Dr. Vinodan, his heart rate, when you see, is 108. Blood pressure is controlled at 138/90. He's febrile, conscious and oriented, but irritable and complains of left flank pain. He's been catheterized by the urologist, and the chart shows that he's passed only 450 ml of urine in the last 12 hours. ECG shows a tachycardia, left ventricular hypertrophy with a strain pattern and T-wave changes in the lateral leads. X-ray shows prominent bronchovascular markings and a minimal left-sided pleural effusion. Ultrasound shows a pyonephrosis, a hydronephrotic left kidney, which the urologist wants to remove and do a nephrectomy. So as an anesthetist dealing with this rather challenging case as an emergency, what are your concerns about fluid management in this patient?
It's going to be a challenging situation, and one important thing to do is to see this patient and prepare this patient before the surgeon puts the knife. So I think I'll go see this patient, make sure that the intake-output chart is looked at, and then you know how much is the usual urine output, you know how much fluid you can give, and chart your procedure. In case it's possible, I may be able to look at his fluid responsiveness and see how much fluid can be given to this patient. That will depend on how much the monitoring system I have. I can actually take the patient into an ICU and then see the, at least see the, do a PLR maneuver and see how much fluid responsiveness is there. And definitely, although may be controversial, but I'll definitely have a CVP line in this patient. And in case if the patient looks really in hemodynamic bad situation, I'll have an arterial line and then also monitors the dynamic variables. The fluids in this patient will be definitely a crystalloid, but my choice will be a isotonic chloride-free, poor balanced salt solution initially. How much should be given will be calculated according to the various parameters that I've.
So at this point, I'm going to put across this question to the audience, many of whom may be practicing with this kind of cases. Would your choice of intravenous fluid be same? Would it be different? Any questions? Quickly, just to spruce it up, otherwise I'm finding it... Right. So here the points he has highlighted are a patient with perhaps chronic kidney disease, oliguria, maybe it's AKI going on CKD. He's probably septic because he's febrile and definitely will have an underlying coronary artery disease, being diabetic with ECG manifestations of some hypertrophy present for some time. He has said the intravenous fluid he would choose would be a balanced salt solution. And perhaps I would differ here. I would like to give a potassium-free solution in this because I'm worried about the probability of potassium going high. So that's why I asked if any of you have different ideas. And he has said he would gauge the adequacy of fluid replacement by CVP, although it is controversial. I'm sure he would look at the urine output and by minimally invasive cardiac output monitors, perhaps looking at the stroke volume variation and pulse pressure variation. And IVC, this thing, if the facilities and the access to the patient are available. Okay, so we now move on.
Just a minute.
Sure.
I wouldn't be bothered about this potassium levels, mainly because he's a patient with chronic renal failure. They usually are stable with a high potassium. Even up to 5.5 milliequivalents, I really won't be that much bothered about the potassium. So I wouldn't be bothered about giving few millimoles of potassium to this patient. That's probably a drop in the ocean as far as the body is concerned.
Right. So that is different practitioners, different policies, both of which may be right. So Dr. Vinodan, you have taken the patient, you have started a balanced salt solution, and the surgeon has positioned laterally for a nephrectomy, and your resident draws a blood gas because nothing has been sent so far, and you did put an arterial line. It shows a pH of 7.28, PCO2 of 36, PO2 145, sodium 131, potassium 5.4, bicarbonate of 16 millimoles, lactate of 3.4, blood sugar is 220. Now, from the time you have started, the catheter has recorded 20 ml of urine, and it's about 1 hour into surgery. His heart rate has increased to 124, BP has dropped to 96 by 68. You have put a CVP line and you have started noradrenaline at 0.08 mics per kg per minute. So does it change your perspective on fluid management? What would you do now?
We have really gone into a bad situation, mainly because various reasons. One is the fact that there is definitely some hypoperfusion stage, and that has produced metabolic acidosis. And also it could be that there is a diabetic management probably is not adequate, probably it needs better management of the diabetes. And it could also be some hypothermia, and most importantly, he needs more fluids. So how will you do this? You cannot push any more of crystalloids. Probably we'll have to use some colloids, but I will definitely not use a synthetic colloid. The definite reason to not to use synthetic colloids in this situation in a patient with renal insult, all of them, especially the starch, can produce more problem to the kidney and produce more renal dysfunction. So the choice that you have is
Gelatins?
gelatins, but probably I'll use either either albumin or plasma. The present studies, especially the recent literature, shows that these patients who are already in impending urosepsis can have changes in the endothelial glycocalyx, and that's probably going to increase the permeability and then produce more problem as far as the management of fluid is concerned. And the new guidelines which are going to come probably will say that the most probably the best solutions should be that contains either albumin or fresh frozen plasma. Most of the new studies have actually shown that FFP is something that will actually protect and then bring back the endothelial glycocalyx to normal. And I think I'll choose FFP for this patient.
Right. So starches are an absolute no-no. Gelatins, there are centers that use that even in renal transplant. Somehow our levels of comfort are not so much. Albumin, I think, is quite safe. Many of us would use it if we believed it was there. And plasma, in the absence of coagulopathy, would you still consider using plasma, or did you feel that you would give if the INR or something was raised, or the patient bleeding?
FFP in this scenario has nothing to do with the coagulation. It is used mainly to repair the glycocalyx.
Right. So I think we have Dr. Vinodan's inputs and clarity on how he would manage this patient. So a patient with sepsis, background compromised renal function, perhaps an acute kidney injury impending, with metabolic acidosis which could result from sepsis or hypoperfusion. Remember all these points. And when the urine output goes down, I would be careful about giving fluids. You can't rush it with the ease that you normally do for a patient who's catheterized and pouring out urine. So I think that's the take-home message. I just move on to the last panelist, Dr. Sachin George, and then hopefully there'll be some 5 to 10 minutes for discussion. Dr. Sachin, to you. 23-year-old male is brought to the emergency room after road traffic accident. GCS on arrival is 10, heart rate is 120, and BP is 140/90. After initial stabilization, a CT that's performed shows a left-sided extradural hematoma, ventricular compression, and no midline shift. He's scheduled for a decompressive craniectomy. So this is a patient with a fluid injury, and contrast to the other discussions we've had in abdominal surgery. Is it different fluid resuscitation in a traumatic brain injury as compared to an abdominal surgery?
In traumatic brain injury, the fluid resuscitation will be slightly different. The guidelines changes every day the way our politicians change the word. Because right from 2004 when SAFE study came, there have been a lot of RCTs and studies, but then conclusively nothing came out as to which is the best strategy. Our logic should guide us. So we know that brain and spinal cord is protected by blood-brain barrier, and mostly nothing but water goes in and out. So in traumatic brain injury, we should know that blood-brain barrier is injured. There will be a lot of inflammatory mediators that is in play, and due to injury, probably the cerebral auto-regulation that is also lost. So we have a patient with all these protective factors which have gone for a 6. So our fluid management and brain is enclosed in a cranial vault that is not expandable. So considering all these factors, we should plan our fluid strategy accordingly. So
what would you give? What fluid, what bottle would you hang up there?
Yeah, my initial fluid of choice for resuscitation will be normal saline.
How much would you give?
Yeah. Like we said, how much of fluid is again a controversy. We have initial resuscitation period. The fluid should be guided optimally, ideally, by a minimally invasive um, monitor like stroke volume
Stroke volume or
variability
pulse
or
pressure
pulse pressure
variation.
variability.
So
Based
how
on
much would
that.
you give? 100 ml per hour, 80 ml, 120?
That depends on the fluid receptivity of the patient.
Pulse pressure variation is 14.
Yeah, we have to target it around 12 to 14. That will be ideal.
Right. So,
And
is there any difference between hanging up a hypertonic saline, because there's a lot of literature about giving hypertonic saline, we use it to reduce intracranial edema. So, is there a difference between normal saline versus giving hypertonic saline? Will it improve outcomes?
Again, the studies are controversial. Hypertonic saline was supposed to be considered the choice of fluid, but then again, current literature is not so conclusive. But definitely not ringer lactate, because all these balance salt solution tend to be hypotonic, and isotonic or hypotonic solutions are better avoided.
Right.
And
So-
again, yeah, that controversy never ends. That's what I
So,
wanted.
in a traumatic brain injury, begin with normal saline, can consider a role for 3% if there is cerebral edema and you believe in it, right? Definitely not ringers here. Supposing you decide you're in intensive care, a new intensivist has come and there's several bottles of albumin lying around. Would you like to put one? Like it has been said before by previous speakers, you just need to give 1/3 the volume or little more than 1/3 the volume and you get the same distribution in the intravascular compartment.
Because here, volume resuscitation is, when you consider volume resuscitation generally, we have other factors in play when you have a traumatic brain injury. So albumin probably in the initial phase I would not use.
Right.
Albumin probably has a role when you consider for evacuation phase.
So I'm just coming to that. So I think that Malbrain's ROSE concept in dealing with head injuries, can you briefly outline what that is, the strategy of ROSE?
The ROSE concept was brought by Malgrain probably in 2014. This he briefly mentions about the stages in a critically ill patient. That is, first is R stands for resuscitative phase. Again, in resuscitative phase, that is just minutes after the injury. We go in for resuscitation, fluid resuscitation, which is again guided by if you have a minimally invasive monitor, that would be ideal. But it is basically target, goal, certain goals has to
Right.
be reached.
So you resuscitate, optimize, stabilize,
Yeah.
and you need to evacuate, which is what you are coming to.
Evacuate,
So
yeah.
albumin is definitely not indicated in the resuscitative phase. But why do you need it in the evacuation?
That is, if the patient has a second hit, or if the patient does not improve into the flow phase, like in the optimal phase, we need to drive the fluid out.
Right.
That is, at this phase, there is something called probably PAL strategy. That is a high PEEP for a short time,
Increase permeability.
that is to
Okay.
drive the fluid from the alveoli to interstitial phase.
Okay.
There comes albumin, guarded use of albumin along with Lasix.
Right. So that's the, what is the role? Supposing you've had a traumatic brain injury, you've done a craniectomy, patient is in the ICU on day 2. What fluid orders would you write for him and what's your target?
Here, we'll keep a zero or a negative balance for the patient. That would be the ideal, because positive balance has shown to cause multiple organ injuries in a patient, and most of the mortality in day 3, day 4 happens not because of brain injury but because of other organ injury for a polytrauma patient.
Ironically, when the patient is recovering from all those inflammatory mediators, they diurese. So when they diurese themselves, they become negative.
Yes.
When they don't, they are not the responders, and that's where there's trouble. They probably would have a poor outcome anyway. What you're doing is to drive the fluid out and perhaps improve the outcome. So I've actually concluded my panel discussion in 42 minutes with the idea of throwing it open to the House. You have a team of very, very eminent faculty here. And if there are any questions, I would like you to address so that we can have some interaction as well. Thank you. We had a speaker who kept saying discussed in the panel. Maybe she'll have some thoughts to add. Any questions? Dr. Suresh?
Just a couple of comments about the hepatorenal syndrome. One is, Dr. Kundra said he'll be using, first point is that the message that we should give out about central venous, CVP, it's not a bad thing. A normal patient with a normal heart, a CVP, as long as it is low, indicates that the patient is hypovolemic. We should not miss that. It's the intensivists who say bad things about the central venous line. The second thing is, I want to make is about putting a urinary catheter to assess the volume status. Is no longer recommended because evidence shows that intraoperative urine output does not correlate in any way with the occurrence of urine output, renal failure in the postoperative period or the urine output in the postoperative period.
But wouldn't you get an idea if you were heading towards oliguria?
The present recommendation as far as I know is that do not put a catheter just to assess the urine output. If you want other things, if you suspect a hepatorenal syndrome, fine, because we have to measure the urine output, we have an idea of that.
This is just obstructive jaundice. This is not
so his liver is normal, his heart
liver
is normal.
is essentially normal.
So if the liver function is normal, is there any harm in starting uric lactate in this patient? You said you want an acetate-based.
Not really. Only when the lactate is on a higher side.
I think I put a slide where the lactate went to 3.4.
Okay.
So that's when...
I initially said you can start with ringal lactate or acetate-based solution, any one of them which you prefer. That should not be an issue. Only when the lactate starts rising up, that is probably a point when we can withhold the ringal lactate.
One question, Madam Rebecca. Madam, you said if the patient is mildly or moderately dehydrated, you said half saline. Do you use it routinely or do you check the sodium along with that? Serum sodium.
You have to check the sodium, and that is where you get your initial targets. When you check initially, if the sodium is low, you would start with normal saline. You would give 20 ml of normal saline. If you have to correlate your dehydration to the electrolyte investigations. And usually resuscitation is with normal saline. You don't even worry about the dextrose at that time. Then when it comes to moderate or mild, you can add the dextrose, half normal saline.
Madam, is there any other situation than pyloric stenosis that you would use half normal saline in these children? Or are you, I would only use it for this. Most other situations is RL.
Agreed.
Is that correct?
Most other situations I would use RL, but I would use, if the child is below 1 year, my standard of use is 1% dextrose with full strength RL.
Yeah.
And it's not available in India. So what we do is take a 500 ml RL, take out 20 ml and put 20 ml of 25% dextrose into it. That gives you your 1%.
This is what I heard from Madam years ago, and this is a protocol at Amrita, thanks to her.
Now in Europe, it's available. 1% dextrose is available because we do believe that if you give 5% dextrose to children, two things happen. One is they get too much sugar, and that means that they then pass that out and get dehydrated. The other thing is that if you use 5% dextrose, it's usually hypotonic solution. Isolite P, a hypotonic solution. You don't want that for replacement or maintenance. And please remember, Isolite P, P is not for pediatrics, P is for potassium. So if you use that fast for resuscitation, you're going to cause problems with the P.
Any other questions? Ashish, you're the one who keeps asking questions. Questions? No questions. Right. So no questions from the audience? Right. If there are no questions, we'll wind up. Thank you so much to the panelists for a wonderful session.